Mr. Gustafson, please bring forth your first witness. Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is my privilege to be here before you today to present my client for your consideration. We will be focusing on one aspect of my client so that you can see with your own eyes the merits and flaws of my character so that you can determine for yourself if you would also like to consider my client for your own interests. My client will serve as the first witness. If you prefer, a witness of character. Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I'm here before you once more for another client of mine to bring before you for your consideration for this character witness. This one is pretty special for me. This is an old friend. I perhaps have played 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons more than any other edition that's out there, really. As far as playing, when I first got the game, I ran a great amount, but I rarely played. Unless you count solo play where I made up characters to kind of run them through to test my dungeons. Not quite the same thing. When I got into Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, I had a relatively short window of time where I got to play that. I played one character for a fairly long time, but that was a one campaign and that was about it. And I dabbled in it a few other times after that. But second edition is where I spent most of my time playing. When I got to college, the group that I fell into was playing 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. When we played Dungeons & Dragons, we played 2nd edition and kept going with that for quite a few years. I played a variety of characters. I ran a number of games in 2nd edition, so I'm quite familiar with it. At least I was. I admit, I have not played 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons in quite a long time. So this is going to be a little bit of a homecoming for me. I will be using the same methods, however, that I used back in the day for generating a character, which was primarily that I would roll the dice and let the dice determine what character I would play, much as I've done up to this point with the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Again, my general policy is that if I roll no great stats, I'll play whatever. The character might not live very long, and if they do, it's probably because of the quirks that I added to the character, more so than the character being truly awesome and overpowering. If I roll a single high statistic, I'll generally end up taking a mage, or somebody who's very focused on just one attribute. Thieves, to a certain amount, would also fall under that. If they have a high dexterity, you can probably be a pretty good thief. Beyond that, if I roll 2 good statistics, I generally start looking into clerics, having a high wisdom, and then whatever else I want to focus on. As the default would be, say, constitution. You want to be able to stay upright as long as possible if you're the healer. But also there is the possibility of going with strength and moving up to dispense a little divine justice with your weapons of choice, or possibly going with something like dexterity if you want to stay out of fights. If I roll 3 really high stats, then you can pretty much do anything, unless your stats are, really high to start thinking of something like a 2nd edition paladin. More often than not, what you're really going to start considering are things like fighters, where if you have a high strength, dexterity, and constitution, you can be a rocking fighter. Great armor class, great damage dealing ability. The hit points to survive in a battle. So all in all, there are... hi. I may end up with a little bit of help too. But if anybody doesn't know my legal assistant, Magic here, she's going to come and make sure that the dice behave for me. So we're going to get right in and make a character up for 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. Alright, here we are. We've got the player's handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. We have an authentic Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition player character record. It's a little dog-eared because this is a very old sheet that has survived with me through various moves and things. But this was actually in one of those neat
multi-packs that you get of the official character sheets. Here I just decided to dump out my dice bag to show you what I usually tote around. I have a hit location die just to help me with narration occasionally when I need a little bit of extra inspiration. I have numerous 20-sided dice, always useful when you have multiple attacks. And the nice thing is with 5th edition, any of those 20-sided dice, I don't have to worry about iterative attacks with different chances to hit and such. I have my percentile dice, also called a dummy die. Got a variety of those. I have 8-sided dice. We'll just tuck away the ones I don't need. And we have 6-sided dice. I also have my fireball dice, which are a combination of death dice that I found on Wish. And just some nice high contrast black and yellow dice that I use for fireballing. I have my brass die that I threaten to throw at people who are being obnoxious. I haven't yet done that, so I'm more bluster than actually following through. And of course my Caltrip style 4-sided dice. All told, I believe, just in the off chance, I will have a 12-sided die out as well. But this is usually what I roll with. It covers just about everything I need. Lots of 10-sided dice for Warhammer or other D10 based games like Werewolf, Vampire, and the rest are various sets of Dungeons & Dragons dice. My personal style is black dice with either white or blue numbering, although that varies. So that's a little bit about me that you might have cared about. Okay, so basically making a character for 2nd edition is very similar to making a character for 1st edition. They carried over a lot of things from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition, including multiple ways of creating a character. So when we do this, we have to pick one of these options. The first one is roll 3 6-sided dice. The total shown is your character's strength score, and then you just go down the list. That generally makes less than awesome heroes, although there's always the possibility of rolling really well. But because you're just rolling a straight 3d6, you're going to generate a number between 3 and 18 with no real bias. So it generally will fall in the bell curve of 9 to 12. So your character will generally end up with average stats. I've never played that way since Basic Edition, when that was the default that I was kind of expressed. That's how you rolled, and I didn't really think too much else of it. Every other group I know of uses method, I believe it's method 5, which is roll 4 6-sided dice, discard the lowest die, keep the remaining 3, so you're sliding the average up by a bit. And you repeat that 5 times and assign those numbers however you want, which basically enables you to pick dump stats and your high stats to optimize the character towards what you want to make. While this generally leads to above average characters, but not super characters, it gives you a pretty good chance of playing the kind of character that you want, which is good because some of the classes actually have prerequisites. So, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to make a character based on the default of 3d6 down and see what comes up. I'll give them a good squeeze that warms them up and gets them ready to roll high. So we have a 9. My technique didn't work. And a 10. And 9. Well, we got the average thing going. As I said, that bell curve. Oh, a 15. And that is in, I believe, where the wisdom would be. Nope, intelligence. I just rolled a mage. Possibly. And an 8. slightly sub-average. And there's an 11. Boom, right there. By the first die rolling method, I have made a character of fairly average stats with a somewhat above average intelligence. That's a perfectly viable character, and yeah, generally I would make a mage. Now we're going to roll 4d6, drop the low, and we'll see what that does to the numbers, and go on from there. So, if I just rolled these three, well, that would have been a 9. This one rolled a 6, that brings that up to a 14. You know, rolling my first set of stats, I don't think I rolled a single 6. But you are still occasionally going to roll mediocre to poor. I rolled a 10 there. And that's a 14. It's again a little bit above average. And there's a 6, and that's a 13. A pair of 6s, but only one to follow that up, so that's a 12. And there's a 9. That's a little bit below average for the... And again, with this way, I could put these numbers wherever I want. In this case, I would probably make this character a cleric, putting a 14 in the wisdom, a 14 in maybe charisma for the roleplay, if I thought that the game that we were playing in was going to feature a lot of interaction. But otherwise, I would probably put that in the constitution. But we're going to make this character based on how I originally rolled using the type 1 rolling method. So we're going to transfer those numbers over. That is 9, 10, 9. And you'll have to forgive my cat. She is a little starved for attention right now, and really not happy that I'm doing this. And then a 15, 8, 11. Okay. So, the first thing is to roll the attributes up. I don't like filling in the rest of the numbers just yet because I would also like to choose my race first. So we would skip on to Chapter 2 where we talk about player character races. Our options are Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Half-Elf, and Halfling. Okay. So we look at the racial ability adjustments. You can look at these like shopping lists if you'd like to. I know a lot of people when they're creating characters, they do. A lot of other players, especially in a more narrative style game, consider the role of the race as being more of the extension of the character more so than the statistics that they provide. But figuring out math-wise, the dwarf would give a bonus to Constitution and a penalty to Charisma, which really wouldn't have any effect on the character. The elf would get a bonus to Dexterity and a penalty to Constitution. That would bring the Constitution to a negative, I believe, and wouldn't really help our Dexterity at all. The gnome would get a bonus to Intelligence, which would be really nice. We would like that. A penalty to the Wisdom, which would make him a very foolish gnome, but a very bright one. And then the Halfling would help our Dexterity out a little bit, which wouldn't change anything, and lower our Strength, which would actually hurt our numbers a little bit. Okay. Now the gnome sounds intriguing because if I'm a gnome, I would have a little bit higher intelligence, which is important for a wizard. If I'm doing this and thinking of, supplementing my class with a race, the gnome would be the first option I would really look at. Anybody who doesn't know what a gnome is, gnomes are akin to the dwarves and halflings, but more so the dwarves. They have a love of mining, but they are less stout and rugged and more intellectual and clever. Unfortunately, a lot of people really hate gnomes because one of the biggest things that their personalities often are described as mischievous. And a lot of players have taken to using that as an excuse to pulling pranks on the party when they play a gnome. I have a player in my group who is rather hard-bitten about the subject. Gnomes can be fighters, thieves, clerics, or illusionists. Only illusionists. They do not have an opportunity for being full-on wizards. That's important to know because some people don't think very much of illusionists, thinking them as second-class wizards. Not necessarily a trait that I subscribe to. Gnomes are sympathetic to dwarves. They find their cousins' aversions to surface dwellers are foolish. Due to their upbringing, a beginning gnome character can choose to know the following languages, in addition to any others allowed by the DM: Common, Dwarf, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Kobold, and Common. The common speech of burrowing animals. So they can talk to squirrels and moles and weasels. The actual number based on the intelligence score. Like their cousins, the dwarves, gnomes are highly magic resistant, which is useful for survival. Gnome also has a bonus to their numbers based on their constitution score on saving throws against magical wands, staves, and spells. Dwarves also get that bonus versus poisons. Gnomes have a chance of failure every time they use magical items except weapons, armors, and shields. This is because of their magic resistance, and this is made every time the gnome attempts to use a device. So they're actually crippled whenever they try to use wands and staves and things. That kind of really hurts, having a flat 1 in 5 chance of your magic items not working when you get them. They can sense a cursed item if the device fails to function. Well, that's interesting. In melee, they add a 1 to their attack rolls to hit goblins and kobolds. They get a bonus to their armor class when fighting large monsters, as small as gnolls, but up to giants and ogre magi and titans. So that's a useful thing to keep alive too. They have infravision up to 60 feet. Nice. Being tunnelers, they can detect stonework, and they have a list of things. They get a bonus to their intelligence scores to reflect their highly inquisitive natures, but they suffer a penalty to wisdom because their curiosity often leads them to go into danger. Now, I personally don't have any prejudice against gnomes. I really didn't want to think of my character being pigeonholed into being an illusionist, but, from where I'm sitting, that's not a terrible idea. When I rolled up this character, I really didn't want to be pigeonholed into thinking of a race to make my character more effective. But the extra point of intelligence from being a gnome is kind of attractive. It takes a character, otherwise my main option would be, say, an elf, except that penalty to Constitution would lower my hit points for a class that already doesn't have a lot of hit points. I believe that a Constitution of an 8, I think, gives you a penalty. I'll just double check that very quickly. Oh, no, it doesn't. You don't get a penalty until you go all the way down to 6. So an elf really wouldn't be a bad thing. An elf has a lot of advantages, too. Some of the defensive ones are really nice, though, especially against big creatures that like to splatter mages. Not sure if I want to be an elf, a human, or a gnome. I think at this point I'm going to go with a gnome. I probably won't have an opportunity to play a gnome otherwise, so I'm going to choose that as my race. Gnome. We're probably going to be an illusionist, but we are going to look at the other classes as part of this exercise. So, the major point of being a gnome is that my intelligence will increase to a 16. And my wisdom will lower to a 7. Oh boy. Yes, this character will be crippled by his curiosity. Always getting him in trouble, I suspect. Hopefully I'll be clever enough to keep him from the dying. Alright, we have lots of things here on this sheet. All this block is for your personal information. The ability block, just like in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, has all the information, and it looks virtually identical. Your basic movement, your saving throws, armor, hit points, a lot of things are pretty much going to be the same. Weapon charts, special abilities. Here we'll write down that we have Special ability, 60-foot infravision. We have extra languages, which we'll look into. We have a magic resistance of +1 for every 3.5 points of Constitution. Well, our Constitution is only a 9, so that'll give us a +2 to our saves versus magic, which is nice. 20% spell failure. Magic item failure. We'll see how that hurts. If it causes your scrolls to go awry, your wands and things, yeah. Well, a little randomness isn't always a bad thing. So we'll see. 80% is still a pretty good chance of things working right. +1 to hit. That would be kobolds and goblins. You're often some of the most common early adventuring creatures, so even though I don't have great statistics, I at least have a little bit better chance of striking those kind of commonly found opponents. And then we have a -4 to my armor class versus big things. And those big things are, I'm not going to write down each one, but just it's understood: gnolls, bugbears, ogres, trolls, ogre magi, giants, and titans. So that's not a bad thing. They subtract 4 from their attack rolls, which effectively basically gives me lower armor class as a result. Effectively. My gnomish dark vision, stonework detection. Again, that could be really useful if you don't have a thief in the group. Some of those stonework traps or panels can be important to know. Also, the ability to know your approximate distance underground and direction can help with mapping, so having an intelligent character who has those advantages can be nice. Okay, now let's look at the other races. Of course, we have half-elves, who have a few abilities similar to the elves. I'm not a huge fan of half-elves. I've only played 1 or 2. They're not terrible characters. They don't have any hugely strong bonuses, but just my own personal preference. I'm not a huge fan of the half-elves. Halflings are fun, especially if you're playing rogues. They are some of the most effective rogues and thieves in the game. Dwarves make great fighters. They're big, tough, and resilient, and with the resistances to poisons and magic can be great rocks to build your party around. And elves have a variety of very useful skills, bonuses to hit, resistance to sleep, and ghoul touch. I have had groups that were saved because one of the members was an elf and the ghouls were not able to take him down. And he was able to save the rest of the group. But, yeah. Oh, and their secret door detection is extremely good, too. Every group should have at least one elf, I think. But in this case, we're going to be a gnome. A little gnome illusionist. So now we'll look at the classes. And some of the classes, well, actually all the classes have requirements. There's not a single class that you don't have at least something that you need to be a particular race. So if you have all of your stats, you rolled nothing higher than an 8, you can't be an adventurer or go be a farmer. However, we did roll higher than that. Since we rolled higher than an 8 in most of our things, there's a few classes that are actually outright forbidden us. We could even be a very ineffective fighter if we wanted to. To be a fighter, you'd have to be 9 strength or greater, which we have. Paladin, 12 strength, 9 constitution, 13 wisdom, and 17 charisma. I don't believe that's nearly as high as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had, but that's clearly outside of what we can do. Plus, you also have to be a human. Rangers, 13 strength, 13 dexterity, 14 constitution, and 14 wisdom. We're clearly not that. Again, also, being a gnome, can't do that. Mage, intelligence of 9. Yes, if you are at all averagely intelligent, you can qualify to be a wizard. We are higher than that, and that will be our thing. But we're stuck being a specialist wizard, which has variable minimums. We'll have to look into that. I'm pretty sure, though, that I'll still be able to qualify. Cleric has a 9 wisdom. We don't have that anymore. Actually, we never did. So I cannot be a cleric, even if I was able to. Druids have to have a 12 wisdom and a 15 charisma, so nope. Thieves, 9 dexterity, which I just have. I could be a poor thief. And bards have a 12 dexterity, 13 intelligence, and a 15 charisma, which we're not going to be able to do. So, warriors. Generally your front line in a group. They wear any armor, they carry any weapons. High strength is a good thing for them. That's nice. We can't do that, though. Not going to be what we do. Their biggest advantage is that they can get multiple attacks per round as they level up. 1st to 6th level, they get 1 attack per round. 7 to 12, they get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. So every other round they get an extra attack. And at 13th level and up, they get 2 attacks per round. This is the payoff for being the person who's going to get beaten on the most in the group. And at top end, they can get a castle and fun stuff like that. Honestly, the fighters get basically dumped on a lot. They start out as somebody that you really need at early levels, and then after that, they're just nice to have. Eventually, the other classes overtake them in usefulness. Paladins are like fighters, but they have access to holy abilities. The ability to cast priest spells once they get up to 9th level. That takes a while. Calling a warhorse, having power to turn undead, and if they can find their hands on a holy sword, they can project power that nullifies incoming magic. They have auras of protection, curing disease, they can heal by laying on of hands. Yeah, paladins are pretty cool. They, however, do have a heck of a time in terms of kind of standing out above everybody else with all those really high requirements. You aren't going to have a lot of times where you're going to roll up a paladin, unless your DM is being very generous or the dice are really, really with you. Then we have rangers. Rangers are fun. Also, paladins and rangers have a different experience progression than the fighters do, but they roll d10 hit dice, so they can rack up a lot of hit points. Rangers, they have the ability to hide in shadows and move silently in natural environments. They can cast priest spells, again, when they get up to 9th level. And they have a few abilities, being able to attack with a couple weapons, being able to bows, having favored enemies, and also having a variety of followers. They end up having a bloody circus following them around. Honestly, at one point you can roll things like treants, the Ents of Tolkien, Werebear or Weretiger possibly, a pixie, or, yeah, entourage. Your ability to build up entourages in 2nd edition were pretty ridiculous. Then we get to wizards. That's where we'll be comfortable. For this character, wizards have d4 hit dice, which is low. They also have the highest experience level required to go up a level. You don't level up very often, but when you do, your power level shoots up considerably. Specialist requirements for an illusionist. Oh, the 16 dexterity. Okay, never mind. We can't be an illusionist. See how much fun this can be? Yeah, if I'm shoehorned into being a particular class, it turns out that I actually do not have enough dexterity to be an illusionist. Now, I know some people don't play with these requirements, but we're kind of going to have to. Just, showing you how this game works. So, gnome is not an option for us. We don't want to be stuck as being a thief or a fighter as a gnome for this. I understand that I will frequently say that optimization is not the only way to play the game, but in this case, yeah, we're going to move away from that. We are going to instead, I think, just be a human. That's not very exciting, I know. I know. And also this eraser is making kind of a mess of the character sheet, and again, kind of sad for that. Sometimes when you play in a basement, bad things happen to erasers. So we'll try this. I made a 15 intelligence. 15 intelligence. And we had an 8 wisdom. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but I forgot about that requirement, so going back, maybe we'll look at being an elf after all. Okay, as an elf, you have the really long lifespan, which is nice. Also, all of this stuff goes away. This makes me a little sad. Surely, somewhere in here, I must have a good eraser. Oh, that's much better. Okay. So, 15 here, and 8 here, and that's all blank. So we tried that, and that didn't quite work out the way we wanted to. I'm going to leave that in the video here, just so that you can kind of see what the trials and tribulations of making a character can sometimes be. But in this case, we are going to instead... my personal mental avatar is a human wizard, but at the risk of playing a lot of humans, especially down the road when humans get a lot of advantages, I think instead we're going to go with an elf. I'm going to be an elven mage. And we're going to be a mage. Elves are not pigeonholed into a particular specialty, so we're going to do that instead. There are 5 branches of the elven race: aquatic, gray, high, wood, and dark. We're going to go high. I like to be the noble elf. Woodland elves are cool, and aquatic elves are fine in their environment. And gray elves are kind of spooky and mysterious, but I just like your... We're going to go with just the archetypal elf that everyone can imagine, that you've seen in Tolkien and so on and so forth. Although gray elves, considered the most noble and serious-minded of the breed, would probably be more like Galadriel and the elves around Mirkwood, whereas the Rivendell elves are probably more like the high elves. Well, we'll just go with this. Player character elf can be a cleric, fighter, wizard, thief, or ranger. An elf can choose to be multi-class. More on that in a second. They have a +1 to their to their dexterity, which would bring that up to an 11. But a -1 to that constitution, bring that down to an 8, which is, again, statistically not a big deal. So we're a little bit nimbler. We do, however, have other advantages for our elfdom. Elves have their own languages. They can choose Common, Elf, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Hobgoblin, Orc, and Gnoll for languages, limited by their intelligence. They have a 90% resistance to sleep. 90% sleep resistant. And charm. I hate being charmed, so that's not a bad thing. This is in addition to the normal saving throws allowed. When employing a bow, anything other than a crossbow, we're using a short or long sword, they get a +1 to attack rolls. +1 to bow or sword. Nice. Being a mage, probably won't use those, but, you know, get those different proficiencies. That's certainly one we can get down the road. An elf can gain a bonus to surprise opponents, but only if the elf is not in metal armor. Well, that's not going to be a danger if we're going to be a wizard. Even then, the elf must either be alone or with a party, blah, blah, blah. Bonus to surprise. Uh, 60-foot infravision. And infravision back in the day was seeing heat. It was not seeing some kind of spectral 3D image in the dark. So that had both advantages and disadvantages. The biggest advantage being that, you know, living creatures stood out very strongly. The biggest disadvantage being that undead creatures that were room temperature, creatures that didn't have any substance, you still couldn't deal with. And secret door detection. Those constructed to be hard to see, and concealed doors are difficult to hide from elves. Merely passing within 10 feet of a door gives an elven character a 1 in 6 chance. We'll just put secret door detection. I remember playing one game where the elven player, every time he passed by a section of wall, he'd just roll a 6-sided die and tell the DM, I rolled a 1 here, a 1 here, a 1 here, and a 1 here. If there was a secret door, the DM would let him know. It worked out all right. Also, if actively searching for doors, elven characters have a 1 in 3 chance, a 1 or a 2 to find a secret door, and a 1 in 2 chance, 1, 2, or 3 on a 6-sided to find a concealed door, one that's not specially designed to be secret, just covered up. Elven characters get the bonus to their stats. Okay, so now we can look at being a mage. Mages. We're not going to be a specialist wizard, we're just going to be a straight-up mage. Mages have, well, basically, you know, you're straight-up elven wizard. With a 16 or higher, I would get a bonus to my experience, but I'm not going to get that because I didn't roll that well. I rolled well enough, but not fantastically. They then go on to talk about all the different specialties with the different schools of magic: abjuration, conjuration, summoning, greater divination, enchantment and charms, illusion, invocation, evocation, necromancy, and alteration. All the different types of spells that you can cast. My character is just going to be a generalist mage, so I can pick any of those. The temptation to be a specialist wizard is actually fairly strong if you rolled well for one of your other statistics, because if you rolled high wisdom, or constitution, or charisma, or dexterity, one of these other options opens up, and it gives you the ability to cast more spells a day. You get a bonus spell in your school. The only downside is that there are opposition schools you could never then learn spells from. So, for example, if you were an invoker, which was popular, that would mean that you had a 16 constitution to go along with your intelligence. You would not be able to cast a spell of enchantment and charming or conjuration summoning. You're so focused on your school, you wouldn't be able to cast the opposition school's magics. And this nice little table here kind of points out the differences. Quite honestly, a generalist wizard is free to be able to go and get any spell that they're interested in, but they don't cast as many as a result. I'm okay with that for right now. I just like the idea of having a wizard who can glom onto any spell that he can find and any magical item that he can find. So that can be used by wizards. Then you have priests. These are generally your clerics. They have a full spell progression up to 7th level. Which is similar to the spells that were out of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. They're mostly going to be concentrating on your healing and your buffing and your debuffing of enemies. So, that's what the cleric can do. Plus, they can wear armor, just about any type, and they can wield a variety of weapons. Although, things have changed a little bit. They can use sharpened weapons if that's one that their particular deity is a fan of. They give a variety of different areas of interest that the deity might be into, and the kind of weapons that they would prefer to use. So not all mythoses are opposed to the shedding of blood, so having the appropriate weapons for that is fine. You would use a weapon, for example, if you followed a war god, you would use weapons of war, which would be in this, battle axe, mace, morning star, or broadsword. A good selection. Also, there were some other interesting things with 2nd edition. They had domains, which were circles of interest that your priest would specialize in. That was something that 2nd edition had and could really change the face of your priest. For instance, we had a priest who followed the god of shadows and secrecy, and he couldn't heal. He was a cleric but had no healing ability. So going into that definitely made for some interesting abilities and powers. And all of the different spheres are in the back. So that would give you a different spell list than just saying all of these are available. A priest of a particular mythos is allowed to cast the spells from only a few related spheres. The priest deity will have major and minor access to certain spheres, and this determines the spells available. Each deity's access to spells is determined by the DM as he creates the pantheon for the world. The 16 spheres of influence are things like animal and plant, healing, divination, creation, combat, summoning, sun, weather. So priest spells were stacked to different spheres, and the god that you picked determined which spheres that you had access to. It was like a shopping list. You'd have major areas of interest, which would give you access to all 7 levels of spells, and then you'd have minor access to others that would supplement your collection, but wouldn't allow you to have every spell in the selection. So that was a big change from 2nd edition from 1st edition to 2nd edition. The Druids were a specialized priest class that had access to the Druids' spells, including some fun ones like Creeping Doom. However, a lot of people consider them to be inferior in dungeon settings. In the nature settings, oh yeah, they were very strong. But again, it varied depending on your location. Couldn't use an entangle spell, for instance, if you were in a cave that had no vegetation in it. So, Druids were kind of up and down. However, their abilities that they were granted in order to, to do well in the wild, being able to get information from the wilderness itself, the abilities to learn the different creatures and languages, a decent selection of weaponry, actually, although they couldn't wear metal, so leather armor, not nearly as protected. They also had the ability to shape change, which was, of course, these were the things that Druids really got known for. When the going gets tough, the Druids turned into something else. If there was a fight, they would often turn into something like a bear with combat abilities. If they had to travel distances, they would turn to a bird and fly away. So they had a lot of flexibility that way and some interesting powers that made them unique. However, again, they had requirements on what their attributes had to be, which was kind of limiting to who could be a druid. And yeah, I've very, very seldomly ever had druids in a group of mine. Rogues, well, rogues, including thieves and bards, had the lowest requirement to go up a level. They could shoot up levels faster. As a matter of fact, they would be up to 3rd level by the time that mage was just getting to 2nd level. They had d6 hit dice, and their whole thing was based on their primary skills, just like in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Pickpockets, open locks, find and remove traps, move silently, hide in shadows, detect noise, climb walls, read languages. These were the bread and butter of a thief, and you looked for opportunities to use these skills and abilities. Different races also helped that. If you were an elf, for instance, I would have a plus 5% chance to pick pockets, plus 5 to move silently, 10% to hide in shadows, and 5% to detect noise. That is on top of some relatively low stats, unfortunately. So if I had a high dexterity and the right race, a lot of these numbers I would be quite a bit better at. Especially if I was rocking like a big 17 or an 18 dexterity. That would be big bonuses across the board. And of course, the halflings are kind of the kings of this measure. They get big bonuses to most of the thieving abilities, although they do have a penalty to climbing walls and reading languages, but all the biggest ones. Your move silently, your hide in shadows, and your taking care of traps and locks, yeah, the halflings are very good at those kind of things. So, halflings are excellent thieves. Elves aren't bad thieves. Dwarves are good thieves when it comes to the mechanical parts, the opening locks and taking care of traps. They're brilliant. As far as the climbing walls, they're not so good, and reading languages, they're eh. But I've seen dwarven thieves pulled off very well. And gnomes actually are pretty good thieves too, all in all, except they have difficulty with the climbing walls with their short little stubby legs. Bards also. If you're curious about bards, I did a good coverage of bards and their various abilities in a related channel. I have my class Warfare, which I covered the bard. Which I thought I did a pretty good treatise on that. They have spellcasting like wizards. They have a couple of thieves' abilities for the social aspect, less so than the adventuring thief. And a little bit of fighting ability, a little bit of spellcasting ability, the ability to charm people who hear their performances and to inspire their allies. Bards aren't bad characters, especially since they get spellcasting relatively quickly, not waiting all the way up till 9th level like some of the other classes. As a matter of fact, by 7th level, they can cast 3rd level spells, which they get to 7th level because they use the rogue experience charts. They get up there fairly quickly. Only 40,000 experience to get to the point where they can cast, say, a fireball. Where at the same time, a wizard who can cast at 5th level needs 20,000 to get to that point. So it does take a bit longer, but then again, there's other things that the bard can do, like wear armor and wield, a better range of weapons. So yeah, we have our choice. We made our bed. Now we're going to sleep in it. First thing we do is, now that we have our race and we know what our stats are ultimately going to be, we're going to go back and start writing in our numbers. For a 9 strength, it's not terribly depressing. No bonuses, but no real penalties. So we'll be drawing a lot of lines here. Weight allowance is 35 pounds. We can carry 35 pounds, no problem, which is your average adventuring stuff, honestly. A max press of 90 pounds, we're kind of on the feeble side, but 90 pounds, it's enough to shove a body around if we need to. Open doors on a 5. That's not very good, but that's opening stuck doors. That's not breaking open locked doors. So we have a 1 in 5 chance of doing that. Or, sorry, a 5 in 20 chance, so a 1 in 4 chance of kicking open a stuck door. Hopefully we'll have stronger people. Bend bars, lift gates, 1% chance. Let's just say we are not going to be bending bars or lifting heavy gates very often. As an 11 dexterity, we're not the most nimble of elves. As a matter of fact, no bonus reaction, no bonus to missile attacks, no bonus to defense. Yeah, it's kind of the life of, the hopelessly average. 8 constitution, no bonus to hit points, unfortunately. 60% chance of surviving system shock. Very traumatic, damaging things like polymorph might actually just kill you from a heart attack from the effect. So I have a 60% chance of weathering an attack like that, and a 65% chance of making it through the trials of resurrection from the dead. Although being an elf, it really takes a powerful resurrection to bring me back. So no bonus to poison saves either. Hopefully that won't be a bad thing. And no regeneration. We're not going to regenerate. You have to get to superhuman levels of constitution for that. Your intelligence. This is where our bread is buttered. So we have 4 languages that we can learn. That's good. Our maximum spell level is 7th, which is some very powerful magic. It's not excellent, but during gameplay maybe we can increase that. It would be nice. We have a 65% chance of learning spells. So anytime we find a scroll or something, we have a 65% chance of learning it, which is pretty good. Maximum number of 11 spells per level, so we'll have to be a bit choosy. And no spell immunity. So, our wisdom. Here we go. We have an 8, which is not great. No magical spell defense. No bonus spells, not that that would matter. We're not a cleric. That's the only thing that applies to. Again, 25% chance of spell failure. If we were trying to pass ourselves off as a cleric, but we're not. And spell immunity, 11 charisma, not terrible, but not great. 11, we have a maximum number of henchmen of 4. So if we're hiring henchmen, we can only have 4 at a time. So the rest, no bonuses, no penalties. What we do is going to be a lot more important than who we are, the nature of how we are. So there we go. We now have a character prepped and ready. We're going to have to add out a few more things to flesh out, though. We have all the racial information. Yay. And going back to wizards. We need 2,500 experience to go up a level. That was right goal. 2,500 XP. Now, I know a number of groups just assume you get maximum hit dice on first level, and as a matter of fact, 5th edition has kind of codified that. But back in the day, that wasn't the case, so you would actually roll for that first hit die. And we rolled a 1. 1 hit point. Yeah, that means that anything we take will kill us. That is not good. Soundly not good. And I know some DMs would let us re-roll that, but we're going to let that stand, actually, because, honestly, that's kind of the system. It's how you roll and you go with it. There's not a lot of extra systems that make your character stronger, more fit, and ready to survive. If your character dies in 2nd edition, much like Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in Basic, you just roll up another character. It's not all that lengthy of a process, and maybe the next one will be better. Or at least better equipped to survive the rigors of adventuring. We will have 1 first level spell. Yay! A wizard's spellbook can be a single book, bundle of books, bundle of scrolls, or anything else. Spellbook is a wizard's diary, laboratory, journal, and encyclopedia. A spellbook contains the complicated instructions for casting the spell's recipe, so to speak. Merely reading these instructions aloud or trying to mimic the instructions does not enable one to cast a spell. They gather and shape mystical energies, and you stick it in your mind. Classes. Okay. We're going to talk about multi-classing really quickly since we're playing an elf. It's possible for an elf to be a fighter mage, fighter thief, mage thief, which effectively would not only give us the ability to mage stuff, but we could fight a little bit, or we could be a thief a little bit. Unfortunately, we're not very good at either strength or dexterity levels, so that's not very tasty of an option. It would just dilute our spellcasting abilities that we're really hinging on to survive. The that 1 hit point is the one thing that makes that tempting to multi-class, but nope. We are going to lie in our bed, and if anything gets close enough to hit us, we're pretty much dead. Alignment! Okay, this game uses the same alignment table from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. You have lawful, neutral, chaotic. You have neutral, neutral, neutral. And you have good, neutral, and evil. So you could be lawful and good. Yep, you could be lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, neutral good, neutral neutral, neutral evil, chaotic good, chaotic neutral, chaotic evil. Lawful means you generally try to stick to the rules as much as you can. You believe in a structured society. Neutral, you can bend the rules from time to time as they're needed. Chaotic, what are rules? You don't follow the rules when they don't make sense to follow them. Good means you value life and you don't take it lightly. It means that also generally you would value the protecting of life to some extent. Evil is the opposite. You don't value life. As a matter of fact, you might relish ending it. Neutrality means you understand there has to be a balance. So on those axes, you can generally make out what your character's outlook is going to be. In this case, I want my character to be a little bit more... honestly, the only way I'm going to survive is if my character is a total coward and stays away from fighting. So I'm not going to have a word that you can really take. My survival is going to be the most important thing. So I'm going to be caring more about chaos than anything. Yeah, words are your word is just there to be broken. As far as good or evil, I don't necessarily want to have a character that nobody likes. Chaotic evil doesn't sound all that attractive. Good, when I can influence it and try to save people, is not a bad thing. And could endear me to people, so maybe chaotic good would be solid. And that's also kind of a common alignment for elves. Chapter 5 is proficiencies, which is optional. They give a selection of different proficiencies that you can take if you choose to use these rules, which I generally don't have any difficulty with. They have a section on the sheet for proficiencies and skills and languages. So in this case, we would take, as a wizard, you'd start out with 1 weapon proficiency. And you get 1 every 6 levels. So we would take the dagger, because you can throw it as well as fight with it. It doesn't do a great deal of damage, but if we throw daggers, we'll be able to keep a little bit of distance between us and bad guys. So carrying around a couple of daggers might be useful. Specialist attacks per round for fighters, giving you more attacks, is cool. But we're not a fighter, so that doesn't matter. So, and again, those are the advantages for people who specialize, basically double proficiency in a particular weapon that fighters can do only. Gives you the ability to do more damage too, which is nice. And get crazy amounts of attacks. Well, not crazy. You get more in 5th edition. You get 3 and 4 attacks per round eventually, and that can be really nice. But this was a simpler time when getting multiple attacks was a big deal. This way, if I have a dagger and I attack with it, even though I don't have any big bonuses to either my strength or my dexterity, I don't have any penalties either. The penalty is for a wizard trying to use a weapon without which they have any skill is pretty bad, -5 to the attack. So at least with the dagger I can defend myself somewhat. We do get 4 non-weapon proficiencies though, and we get 1 every 3 levels. So let's take a look at those non-weapon proficiencies. Player character has more than a collection of combat modifiers. This is different from 1st edition. They didn't have these. So consider yourself as an example. How many skills do you have? Okay, well that's nice. So, non-weapon proficiencies. The most detailed method for handling character skills is that of the non-weapon proficiencies. So, when a character uses a proficiency, either it's automatically successful or they roll a check, which is basically off of their statistic. Secondary skills. This is the alternate method, is rolling secondary skills. Like I could take my percentile dice. This is actually, in my mind, a little silly, but I could roll, and the dice would tell me that my secondary skill, my character is a farmer and knows about basic agriculture. He'd be a bumpkin wizard. That's cute, but all in all, nothing I'd really be all that keen in. The proper specialty page on Chapter 5 outlines a whole list of different proficiencies. And again, this is all new for 2nd edition. So people who wanted to fine-tune what their character knows can now do that. As a wizard, we get 4 of these things, and we would concentrate on the ones that are based off of our intelligence. So, for example, if we took something like astrology, that would use up 2 of our slots. It would be based off of intelligence, and would allow us to read the stars. Now, these skills do have functional abilities. For example, astrology. This gives the character some understanding of the influences of the stars, knowing birth date and time of a person. They can study the stars and celestial events and then prepare a forecast for the future for that person. You can read their future a little bit. The insight into the future is limited to the next 30 days, and his knowledge is vague at best. If a successful check is made, the astrologer can foresee some general event, a great battle, a friend lost, a new friendship made, etc. The DM decides the exact prediction based on his intentions for the next few gaming sessions. Note the prediction does not guarantee the result, it only indicates the potential result. If the proficiency check has failed, you don't get anything. If the result is a 20, then it's wildly inaccurate. This requires preparation and advanced knowledge on the part of the DM, so that could be a fun one to kind of get a forecast on what's going to happen, though. Some of the most useful ones, though, were things like weaponsmithing for fighters who could, build and take care of their own weapons and such. But for a wizard, we have fun ones like ancient history, astrology, engineering, gem cutting, herbalism, ancient languages, navigation, reading and writing, religion, spellcraft. Reading and writing is a proficiency. I believe it's also it is not a general proficiency. There are general ones that anybody can take. Reading and writing is not one. So only certain classes can learn to read and write, mostly the priest and wizard classes. Well, we would have reading and writing. With that, we could probably get a job as a sage if we need, or a sage or a scribe or something like that. Intelligence +1, which is a 16. Spellcraft, that's a good one. It allows us to identify spell effects. And that's kind of replaced by Arcana in modern D&D. That is also based off of intelligence, and it's -2, so that's a 13. And then I think we'd take, let's take engineering. Could be useful to know how best to employ our magical effects. Engineering costs 2, but it is intelligence at -3. So that's a 12. So, yeah, those are non-proficiencies. Non-weapon proficiencies, I should say. We could take ones from Wizard in general, and that's what we did. We just took Wizard. There are a number of general ones as well. Some useful ones, like brewing, a wizard brewer. That's always fun. Direction sense, dancing, heraldry, rope use, swimming, singing. Yeah, there's a number of good ones. The warrior ones are mostly all about moving around and doing athletic endeavors. The rogue ones are about, gem cutting, but forgery, disguise, set snares, reading lips. Some fun ones that, rogues would really, take some advantages on. And priestly ones are, of course, religion and spellcraft, but herbalism, healing, local history, things like that. So our character isn't going to be so much steeped in the lore, but he's more of a practical sense. He knows a lot about magic in general, he knows how to read and write, and he knows engineering principles. So he does have functions that he could do outside of just hurling spells. So our poor, feeble little mage has all of his proficiencies and everything. Now it comes to money and equipment. Yay! We are a wizard, which means we use 1d4 plus 1 times 10 gold. And that's bad. Okay, we flipped it around, and of course, we get a 1. So we have 20 gold pieces worth of gear. Erasing our raw stats that we rolled initially. $20 gold. For what can we do with that? Well, we start out with a spell book. So most DMs let you start out with one. I don't know too many who make you buy your first spell book. Although you might have your own DM who does require it. So I believe, though, that I think we can assume we have it. We'll want a backpack. The backpack is 2 gold. $2. We'll want some food to travel with. Rations. Okay. It's under miscellaneous equipment, tech harness, services, daily food and lodging. Here we go. Meals per day. That's buying them at a store, though. Also, most DMs will let you start out with clothes. Not always. Not always. But iron rations 1 week, 5 gold pieces. And we should also get a water skin. Call it a wine skin, 8 silvers. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll say we have 12 gold left. Oh, daggers. We'll want some daggers. Oh, will we ever want some daggers? Dagger, dagger, dagger. 2 gold per. Okay. We'll get 3. That will leave us with 6 gold. We'll also get a quarterstaff, although I don't think that costs anything. It doesn't. We'll get it because it's free and because we can poke things with it. We won't use it for a fight because we can't. We have almost no chance of hitting anything with it. -5 is a huge penalty for a wizard trying to hit anything. But we have a little bit of money to buy things as we might need. And yeah, this eraser's really... Need to get some new erasables. 6 gold, 2 silver. We'll save that 6 gold for whatever we might need during the course of an adventure. Finally, magic. Wizard spells. So, under the section in magic, there's a paragraph saying, the one good thing that comes from your character's studies is his initial spellbook. It may have been a gift from his school, or it may have been stolen from his hated master. Whatever the case, your character begins play with a spellbook containing up to a few first-level spells. Your DM will tell you the exact number of spells and which spells they are. As your character adventures, he will have the opportunity to add more spells to his collection. So, The way that the DM did it for when I was playing last was he rolled a die or let me choose if I wanted to have 3 spells. I generally chose 3 spells because rolling and getting a 1 or a 2 would seem catastrophic. The opportunity to have 6 would be nice, but all things being equal, I wouldn't really want to get stuck. So I'm going to choose 3 spells when we get to that point. We're going to keep filling out stuff, though, first. Saving throws. And, oh yes, that wonderful number, Thaco. Thaco. At first level, everybody has a 20 Thaco. That is the 2-hit armor class of 0. Because I have no bonus to hit or to damage, when I roll my 20-sided die, I can roll. I rolled a 7, subtracting 7 from 20 would give me a 13. I'd hit an armor class of 13, which wouldn't hit anything, really. But if I rolled an 18, for instance, I could subtract this 18 from the 20 Thaco and find out that I hit an armor class of 2. It's pretty simple. Thaco has kind of gotten a bad reputation because additive math is a little bit easier, but it's not anything that somebody who, gives it a try and plays for a little while can't make it work out. But Thaco of 20 with the dagger. Number of attack 1. No bonus to attack. No bonus to damage. We'll fill those numbers out later. They can be thrown. We'll fill that information out. No special attacks. No ammunition. None of the fun things. If we ever roll up a good fighter, we can fill some of these things out. But right now, we have an armor of 10. That's an unarmored armor class. They still tried to have a weapon type versus armor modifier so that different types of weapon would work better against different armors. This honestly was a bit more elegant than the old weapon table and bonuses or penalties against specific armor classes. That works pretty well. Even so, I know a lot of people never use that. It just made things a little bit more complicated again. But it allowed you to have a paper, rock, scissors game where you would choose up the best weapon to attack a particular type of armor, just like in real life fighting might have done. Different combat modifiers too. We're hopefully not going to get into very many fights. Wizards go up, their Thaco improves so slowly that I'm not really going to worry about that. All these other things about combat and everything, that's something we want to stay away from as much as possible. The section on magic didn't give us a lot of information, including the spells that we need, so we'll just write down the information we have on daggers really quickly. Daggers, weight 1 pound, size small, damage piercing, 1d4 or 1d3 damage. Size small, damage piercing. Speed factor 2. Yeah, we had speed factor back then. A fast weapon could hit first more often, and yeah, with this weapon that isn't going to matter much. Weight 1 pound each. Range, yeah, they can be thrown. Daggers can be thrown 10, 20, 30. Different ranges. In close range you get a bonus. At farthest ranges you get penalties to hit. We would like to get people close and still throw daggers into their backs if I have to do that. And honestly, a wizard, generally, you only have, at first level, 1 spell to throw. Once you've thrown your spell, that's all you have left is whatever else you can think of. In this case, it would be throwing daggers. So, okay, if I have 3 first level spells, but I'm a generalist mage, so I can choose anything. There are a total of 45 spells in the basic book. Not all of them are equally useful, however. There's a couple of clear winners. While it might be interesting to have a wizard mark spell for personal pride and what have you, or Featherfall being a very useful spell in very limited circumstances. Probably the best or my favorite general spells are, first of all, I always have liked Sleep. The ability to knock down several foes and bypass an entire encounter with one spell is just too useful. And that's a spell that continues to stay useful as you go. Magic Missile is a fun one to know, but that's your one spell and you're done at low levels, and at 2nd edition that doesn't do a great deal of damage. Sleep is oftentimes going to be far more useful. Color Spray is a good one for dazzling enemies, and it works on more than one. And then finally, I like to have a defensive spell. So with 1 hit point, it's really kind of dicey which way to go. But since I have very few other things that are really going to help me out, unless I have a really great party, I'll take Armor, which turns into Mage Armor. Basically because that's just the spell that might keep me alive in a fight. And oftentimes I'll probably take that. It lasts for... creates a magical field of force. It protects as if you're wearing scale armor, so armor class 6. It would give me a 4-point bonus to my armor class. And it does not hinder movement, etc., etc. Casting time is 1 round. Spell has no effect on a person who's already wearing armor, which is good. It lasts until successfully dispelled, or the wearer sustains cumulative damage totaling greater than 8 points plus 1 per level of caster. So I can cast that on me, and I am protected until I die. So, yeah, that is a spell that I could ask the DM if I could have had that spell cast already, because quite honestly, even a child with a rock could kill me in 1 shot. So that is a good spell to have. My character will always have that armor class until he dies, which will happen fairly soon if I'm not really clever and things don't go my way. All right, so that is our character. A bunch of other details, information. Character name, we're gonna go with Elec. Agmarine. That sounds like a fun elven name. Level 1. Class Mage. Player's name, Rob. Homeland is going to be specific on the campaign. A lot of this is religion, race, clan, liege, or patron. This stuff is all going to be based on where we're at. Likewise, the game might have something to do with sex and age, and I know some DMs have their own rules for height, weight, so that's not as important, although I know that I could roll those up. Oh yeah, I forgot. A couple other important numbers. Magic. Saving throws. I should put those down. Saving throws, saving throws, saving throws. I know they're in here somewhere. Combat. Touch spells and combat. The saving throw. There we go. This big table. Anybody who's played this game knows this one. 14, 11, 13, 15, 12. So it's 14, 11, 13, 15, 12. That means that I'm pretty good at avoiding the effects of rods, staves, or wands, and spells. Not so good at the Petrify Polymorph, but not terrible. Against Paralysis and Poison and Breath Weapon, though, yeah, I'm in trouble. Alright, as of right now, I could make this character and go with it. We want to fine-tune a little bit in terms of movement, since we're non-encumbered. This is just going to be a straight-up number and all the extras, but functionally, this character is all but finished, just filling in a few other minor details. So, Elic would be ready to go adventuring with a group. So, filling in all those details again would be campaign-specific, and basically varies depending on how detailed your adventure that you're going to be questing in is going to be. So, that being done, we have the character finished. Back to me. And so we have it, another finished character in the books. I hope that you can see from this example the differences between 2nd edition and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from the 1st edition. There are several changes, but it kept a great deal of what was familiar in the 1st edition, and again, even carried over some of the things from original Dungeons & Dragons. You still had the same basic attributes, and the advantages that they gave out pretty much fell in line with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. You still had familiar things like saving throws, but now instead of looking at a attacking matrix for the result of your dice rolls, you mentally calculated it out so that you would be able to report to the Dungeon Master what armor class you hit, because you would subtract whatever you rolled from your THAC0 to find out what armor class that you struck. This was a bit of a difference, relying less on tables and more on just recorded numbers and simple math at the table. So a lot of the refinements of the game started to come into play as well. The ability to have secondary skills, I believe, was something Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition had, where they had different backgrounds that you could have that would give you areas of knowledge outside of the adventuring life. This was not very satisfying in that it may give you a bit of extra, depth in your character, but ultimately didn't provide you with hard numbers and skills that would be appropriate to your adventuring profession. Which only makes sense. If you're a mage, for instance, that's a lot of dedication and focus that your character had to have. Probably would not have spent all that time as a farmer learning all about agriculture and how to keep a farm going and crops producing at the same time that he was learning how to bend the fabric of reality to his whim as a mage. Likewise, background of a guard makes a lot more sense for a fighter, or maybe a smith, somebody who's used to playing around with weapons, as opposed to, again, a scribe. Resulting in a random dice roll can lead to some odd, maybe even questionable choices. Not impossible, but odd. With the proficiency system, you have the ability to pin down what your character knows and be able to reflect that in a way that the game can give you an actual mechanical outcome. If you want a weapon, for instance, but you can't find anybody around who's willing to sell you one, if you can buy some raw materials and go in, rent some time at the forge, you can bang out a great sword, even if your area is in peacetime and nobody has a great sword for sale. A person who has weaponsmithing can then go and make weapons for themselves. Later on, you can also tinker with those formulas and allow people to do things with the game that maybe not be spelled out. This is part of the customization that 2nd edition kind of grew on. So, for instance, if somebody really put in a great deal of effort, spent, say, double the amount on the materials for a sword, and then rolled an extremely good roll, you could say that, the weapon was mastercrafted and maybe gave them a bonus, or had a distinctive look that would be recognizable, that would be the signature of that fighter. There were a lot of things that 2nd edition kind of tweaked the formula for, while keeping what was good about Dungeons & Dragons, and making it just a little bit more accessible and a little bit easier to use for everybody involved. The game master as well as the person making the characters. Now, as far as the classes went, some of the arcane elements were taken out and some new options were opened up. For instance, grouping everybody into 4 large bands, the warrior types, the priest types, the wizard types, and the rogue types, actually worked fairly well at, having solid experience tables without having to spend extra pages on completely detailing one class that is functionally somewhat similar to another class. or constantly referring to those other classes. Instead, it was able to say, this is how this mechanic is used, and this class uses this part of it, this class uses this part of it, and it all kind of made sense together. This was a good idea, and this was an advancement that the second edition really took a step, another leap forward. However, functionally, not a lot changed. Your basic mechanics of combat stayed the same. You had the descending armor class, you still had roll a 20-sided die and compare it to an armor class to see if you hit. Magic worked in about the same way. There were a few refinements, big changes to how the priest worked. The clerics, for instance, had full range of access to their various spells, and even though our Unearthed Arcana came out that gave them access to more spells, they still didn't have a huge range of spells, but anything that was there was the all-you-can-eat buffet for the cleric. Now, your clerics had different looks and feels. Anybody who's played World of Warcraft and knows the difference between a Shadow Priest and a Holy Priest, they feel completely different because they have completely different functions and roles. And that's how priests ended up being. They became very specialized and known for certain things, and that flavored everything that they could do. Their whole outlook, their appearance would change, but so could their impact in the adventuring world. The spells they had access to and the outlook that they had and the weapons they would wield changed by the deity that you would follow, and sometimes by the game master and how they ruled things. Thieves didn't change very much. They didn't really need to. Their abilities were all fairly much outlined, and they just carried that on over. With proficiencies, fighters became a little bit cooler. They were able to get a lot of different weapons, and their specialties that they were able to get are nice. The ability to attack a little bit more often and get bonuses to damage kind of helped to balance out the fact that fighters became less and less relevant as you went up levels, and other classes started doing things as well, if not better, than they could. When your mages were starting to take over entire encounters, your fighters could be left behind. These things helped patch that and keep your fighters able to keep up and help out against a wider variety of opponents. So bringing some of these other classes into line also helped to codify the system so that there was less ambiguity. The paladin felt like a fighter and had all these special abilities, but everything was easier to find. The art also got much better. The book is a lot more pleasant to look at. I'm not saying I have anything against the old Errol Otis art or anything like that. It's perfectly fine. But Dungeons & Dragons kind of took the position as, we are the flagship brand for this hobby, and our books are going to reflect that. And they really did. The artistry and the craft of the books picked up. Better layouts, better design, better art. The organization of the book was a little less arcane and was a more codified and easy to follow game manual. I have made many a character in that book, and after a while your fingers just start going to the right places and knowing where things are. The book is yellowed with age and a few stains here and there from being well loved and well played with. But all the same, it's still every bit as much as rich with the potential for adventure as it ever has been. Just in this opportunity, even though I haven't made a second edition character in well over a decade, the opportunity to make this character and all the possibilities, all the potential that were there when I was crunching those dice together and getting ready to make my first cast, I could imagine everything from Conan to Merlin to my own stories that I was ready to tell with this character. Now, I may be a little bit disappointed with the character that I rolled. Certainly not overwhelming. I still have yet to make this killer character for this game system. Although I have some fun ones. Montana was fun, certainly, back in Twilight 2000. But as far as Dungeons & Dragons being about making heroes, up till this point, those characters were good, but again, the focus was on making pieces that had abilities and skills that worked together And by merging your abilities together with others, you were able to fill out a party and could tackle greater encounters and greater challenges than one individual could do. It was about the role you played, not necessarily the character role, but the role in your group. The game was only starting to continue the evolution of developing more storied contents and things. This little bit with backgrounds and skills and abilities outside of your adventuring abilities was a big step. But when we get to the next edition, 3rd edition, and you start to get into things like prestige classes and all kinds of backgrounds and things, the moving parts start to move and mesh together even more to create characters that are touched by their environments and become part of their world, more so than just playing pieces that move around the world and act upon it. I hope you've enjoyed this character witness. I certainly did enjoy making this character. It was a nice callback to times long gone. But even to this day, I would still happily step up to a 2nd edition game, even though it feels like I have a fraction of the choices that I have in 5th edition, even though it feels like some things are just hard limits for the sake of being hard limits. It was a system that had infinite potential, and I've told an awful lot of really good epic stories, and even little stories that weren't so epic, but were still impactful and still live on in the memories of the people who participated in them. Thank you for joining me, and I hope that you're with me next time I do another one of these character witnesses and I'm called before the stand to testify for 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. So, thank you once more, and I bid you good day.